My son kicked his mother in the face, and my mom called my wife a nag. So I let him stay with her, and she called me shaking at 11 p.m., begging me to come get him. My son Wes was 13 years old, and he kicked his mother Rena in the face while she was kneeling down to pick up his laundry off his bedroom floor. He didn't trip. He didn't swing his leg by accident. She asked him for the third time to pick up his own clothes, and he was lying on his bed playing a game on the tablet my mother bought him, and he lifted his foot and kicked her right in the left eye. She fell backward onto the carpet, and Wes didn't even pause his game. I was downstairs when I heard her hit the floor, and by the time I got to his room, Rena was sitting against the wall holding her face, and Wes was still on his bed with his headphones in staring at his screen like nothing had happened. Rena's eye was already swelling shut. I took her downstairs and put ice on it, and she told me what happened, and I went back upstairs and took the tablet out of Wes's hands, and he looked at me like I had just stolen something that belonged to him and said Grandma gave him that and I had no right to touch it. He was 13 and he told me I had no right. I called my mother that same night and told her what Wes did. She asked me if Rena had been nagging him again. That was her word, nagging. I told her Rena asked him to pick up his own laundry 3 times and he kicked her in the face. My mother said Wes was going through changes and that boys his age have big emotions, and sometimes they lash out physically because they don't have the words yet. She said if I punished him too hard, I would lose him forever. She told me to give the tablet back and let things cool down. My mother had been undermining us with Wes since he was 8. Every time we grounded him, she called him on the phone and told him it wasn't fair. Every time we took something away, she replaced it. We took his first gaming system because he broke a window throwing a controller, and my mother bought him a better one the following weekend. We took his phone after he told Rena to shut up at the dinner table, and my mother gave him her old phone with a new case and said every boy needs to be able to reach his grandmother. Wes learned early that our discipline had a backdoor, and that backdoor was my mother. He knew that whatever we took, she would give back double, and whatever consequence we set, she would undo with a phone call and a gift. By the time he was 12, he had stopped listening to us completely. He talked to Rena like she was beneath him. He called her by her first name instead of mom, because my mother once joked that Rena worried too much and sounded more like a teacher than a mother. Wes picked that up and started treating Rena like she was a substitute in a classroom he didn't respect. He would look through her when she talked. He would leave the room when she asked him to do something. He would go to his room and call my mother and complain about Rena, and my mother would always take his side. The black eye was not the beginning. It was the result of 5 years of someone teaching my son that his mother's authority was optional. The morning after it happened, Rena's eye was purple and swollen almost shut. She went to work, and her co-workers asked what happened, and she had to tell them her 13-year-old son kicked her in the face. She came home that day and sat at the dining table and told me she felt like a stranger in her own house. Not because of Wes, because of my mother. She said every time she tried to be a parent, my mother turned her into the villain and rewarded Wes for resisting her. I went to my mother's house that Saturday. Wes was already there because he had called her Friday night after I took his tablet, and she picked him up without asking either of us. When I arrived, Wes was on her couch playing with a brand new tablet she had purchased that morning. Not a used one, brand new. Still had the plastic film on the screen. I told my mother I wanted to talk to her alone. She sent Wes to the other room for a snack, and I told her this was over. I told her she would stop buying Wes things we had taken away. She would stop answering his calls when he was being disciplined. She would stop picking him up from our house without permission, and she would never again call Rena a nag. My mother said I was being ungrateful, and that she did more for Wes than Rena ever did. I told her Rena had a black eye from the boy she helped create. My mother said boys roughhouse and I was blowing it out of proportion. I told her Wes could stay with her for the rest of the month. Her face changed because she hadn't expected that. She wanted the fun parts of Wes, the weekends and the gift giving and the phone calls where she was the hero. She didn't want the daily reality of a 13-year-old who had been taught that women in authority don't need to be listened to. Wes lasted 9 days at her house. On day 3, he told her to shut up when she asked him to clear the table. On day 5, he refused to shower for school and told her she couldn't make him. On day 7, he threw a plate at the dining room wall because she made chicken instead of ordering pizza. On day 9, he called her a stupid old woman because she turned off the Wi-Fi at 10 o'clock, and she called me at 11 at night with her voice shaking and asked me to come get him. So there I was at 11 at night listening to my mother cry into the phone about the same boy she told me I was being too hard on. 9 days. That's all it took for her to get a taste of what Rena had been living with for 5 years. I told her I wasn't coming. There was silence on the other end. The long kind. The kind where someone is trying to figure out if they heard you right. Then her voice changed. She said, "He's your son. You can't just leave him here." I said, "You picked him up without asking me. You bought him a new tablet the same morning I took his away. You wanted him. You have him." She said Wes called her a stupid old woman, and she had never been spoken to like that in her life. I said, "Rena has, for 5 years, and you told her she was nagging." Then the crying got louder, the loud, open kind. She said, "I didn't raise you to be this cold. I didn't raise a son who would leave his mother alone with a child who scares her." That line had worked on me my whole life. When I was 15 and wanted to go to a friend's house, she said something like that, and I stayed. When I was 22 and moved in with Rena before we got married, she told me I was abandoning her, and I almost didn't sign the lease. Sitting on the phone at 11 at night, I felt that pull again, the one that made me want to say I'd be there in 20 minutes. I almost said it. Then I heard something behind me. Rena was standing in the hallway in her robe. The bruise around her left eye was an ugly mix of green and yellow, still very much there. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She just stood there looking at me. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. I told my mother I would come get Wes in the morning, but there were going to be conditions. The change in her voice was something else. She went from sobbing to business in half a second. She said, "What conditions?" Just like that. No more tears. No more shaking. Like we were working out terms on a car deal. I said, "We'll talk about it in person," and I hung up. The phone started buzzing almost right away. Alara called back. I let it ring. She called again. I set the phone face down on the counter. She called a third time, and I watched the screen light up and then go dark, and that was that. 3 calls. I didn't answer a single one. I walked over to Rena and asked her to sit with me at the dining table. I told her I needed to hear everything. Every phone call, every gift, every comment my mother had made to Wes about her. She talked for 40 minutes. She told me about a phone call she walked in on 2 years ago, where Alara was on speaker with Wes in his room, telling him that Rena wasn't his real family because she married in. That blood is thicker than water. Rena said she stood outside Wes's door and listened to the whole thing. When she confronted Alara about it later, Alara denied it and told her she was being paranoid. She told me about another time when Wes was 10, and Alara told him on the phone that if things ever got too bad at home, he could come live with her permanently. She gave a 10-year-old boy an escape hatch from his own mother. I felt sick. All those years I thought Alara was just being a little too generous. I told myself she meant well and just loved Wes too much. But this wasn't love. This was a campaign. Rena sat back in her chair and said, "I'm not asking you to cut off your mother. I'm asking you to choose what kind of man Wes becomes. Because right now, he's becoming her." That hit me in a place I didn't know was still soft. I looked at her and said, "I hear you. Tomorrow morning, this changes." She nodded once and went to bed. I didn't sleep. I sat at the dining table and wrote down every incident I could remember. 2 pages front and back. The next morning, I was at Alara's driveway by 7:30. The driveway was empty. The house was dark. I knocked. Nothing. I called her phone. Voicemail. Twice. Then a feeling hit me. A cold little twist in my gut that told me my mother had done something I didn't see coming. I drove home. I turned onto my street and saw Alara's car parked right in front of my house. Not in the driveway. On the street, like she had pulled up fast and didn't care. I parked and walked inside. Rena was at the dining table with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. I said, "Where's Wes?" "In his room." Door closed. Rena told me Alara had shown up at 6 in the morning with Wes's bags at her feet and tears already on her face. Alara had pushed past her into the house, dropped Wes's bag on the living room floor and said, "Here, since my son thinks I'm such a terrible grandmother, you deal with him." Then Alara turned to Wes and said, loud enough for the whole house to hear, "Tell your mother I'm sorry I ever tried to help." Wes didn't respond, didn't look at Rena, walked past both of them and went straight upstairs and closed his door, like Rena was furniture. Then Alara opened her arms at the door like she was going to hug Rena. Rena said, "Don't touch me." Alara left in tears. I understood exactly what my mother had done. This wasn't surrender. This was a move. She knew I was coming with conditions, so she got ahead of it. She went to Rena, not me, because Rena was the one she could perform for. And that line she told Wes to repeat was a script. She wanted those words in his ears, so she would still be the hero in his story. I went upstairs. Wes was sitting on his bed, legs crossed, the brand new tablet in his hands. He didn't look up when I walked in. I said, "Hand it over." Grandma said I could keep it. His voice was flat and practiced. I said, "Grandma doesn't live here." He looked up. He said, "She said you'd do this. She said you always take her side over mine." That wasn't Wes talking. Those were Alara's words coming out of my 13-year-old son's mouth. She had been coaching him. Even during the 9 days when she was overwhelmed and scared and calling me at 11 at night begging for help, she was still filling his head. She was still whispering in his ear that his parents were the problem and she was the solution. She was still planting seeds even while the garden was burning down around her. I took the tablet out of his hands. Not rough, not angry, just firm. He jumped up off the bed like I had hit him. He stood there with his fists tight and his jaw set, and he said, "I'm calling Grandma." I said, "No, you're not. Sit down." "About what?" I said, "About your mother's face." Something in his expression shifted. The hardness loosened. His shoulders dropped half an inch. He sat back down. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo Rena had taken of herself the morning after. She took it for her own records, she told me later, because she had a feeling she might need proof someday that this was real. The purple was dark and deep around her left eye, and there was a red line where his heel had caught the bridge of her nose. I held it in front of him. He looked at it for maybe 2 seconds, then turned his head to the side like someone had put something rotten under his nose. I said, "Look at it." My voice was calm. I wasn't yelling, but there was nothing soft in it either. He turned back. I held it there and I let him sit with it. I said, "You did that. Not an accident. Not roughhousing. You kicked your mother in the face because she asked you to pick up your own laundry. You're 13 years old, and you did that." His jaw got tight. His eyes got wet. He held it. Then he said, "Quiet. Grandma said it wasn't that bad." My chest went cold. I said, "Your grandmother is wrong, and your grandmother is the reason we're in this room." Then I laid it out. Every gift, every phone call, every time Alara had erased a consequence we set. I told him Alara wasn't helping him. She was making sure he needed her more than he needed us. He said, "Grandma loves me. She's the only one who actually listens to me." I said, "She doesn't listen to you, Wes. She uses you. When you got in trouble, who did you call? Not me. Not your mom. You called her, and she made sure it stayed that way. That's not love. That's control." He sat there a long time. Then he said it, quiet, like he was testing whether the words were safe. He said, "She told me mom doesn't really love me because I'm not her real family. She said only blood counts." My hands started shaking. Rena had told me the same thing the night before, sitting at the dining table. Hearing it from my son was different. That was confirmation. My mother had deliberately, consistently, over years, poisoned my boy against his own mother, and he had believed her. I said, "That is a lie. Your mother has been fighting for you every day of your entire life. Your grandmother called me begging to come get you after 9 days. Your mother has been doing this for 13 years and she's still here." That was the thing that broke him. Wes put his face in his hands and he cried. Not the angry kind of crying I had seen from him before, the kind where he's mad he got caught. This was different. This was the real thing. His shoulders were shaking and the sound coming out of him was raw, and it came from somewhere deep. He cried like a kid who just realized something terrible about himself and didn't know what to do with it. I sat there and let him cry. I didn't tell him to stop. I didn't tell him it was okay, because it wasn't okay. Not yet. But I put my hand between his shoulder blades and kept it there. After a while I said, "We're going to fix this, but you have to want to fix it. Do you?" He nodded into his hands. He didn't lift his head. He just nodded, over and over. I went downstairs and told Rena what Wes had said, about the photo, about blood counts. I expected her to fall apart. Her face hardened instead. She said, "I knew. I've known for years. I just couldn't prove it because he'd never say it in front of you." I said, "I need you to come with me to Alara's, right now." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Every time I've confronted your mother, she starts crying. And every time she starts crying, you soften. You go quiet. By the end, she walks away without answering for anything, and I'm the one who feels like I did something wrong." She paused. "I'll go. But if you fold when she starts crying, I'm done. Not with Wes. With you." I said, "I'm not going to fold." She She didn't say she believed me. She just stood up and said, let me get dressed. We left 20 minutes later. The drive to Alara's was quiet. About halfway there, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced down and saw my mother's name. It was a text. I picked it up at the next red light and read it. It said, I hope you're happy. You've turned my grandson against me. I held the phone out so Rena could see it. She read it and didn't react for a second. Then she said, she's already rewriting the story. And she was right. Alara wasn't sitting at home feeling sorry for what she did. She was building her case. In her mind, she was the victim. The grandmother who loved too much and got punished for it. That was the version she was going with. We pulled into Alara's driveway. Her car was there this time. She opened the door with red eyes and a crumpled tissue in her hand. She looked at Rena and her face twisted. She said, I can't believe you're bringing her here to gang up on me. Her, like Rena was a stranger. I said, her name is Rena. She's my wife and Wes's mother, and you are going to speak to her with respect. Alara's mouth opened, then closed. She wasn't used to this version of me. She let us in. We sat at her table. I started laying it out. The gaming system, the phone. She made it through 2 points before she broke. Everything I did was because I love that boy. You two were too strict. A child needs softness. I said, he kicked his mother in the face. That's what your softness produced. She said it was one incident, and I was using it to punish her. Then Rena spoke for the first time since we walked in. Her voice was steady. She said, Alara, your grandson told his father that you said I'm not Wes's real family because I married in. He said you told him only blood counts. Did you say that? The room went silent. Alara's body went still. Then the mask came down. The tears. The hand to the chest. I never said that. He's twisting my words. I would never say something like that. Her voice cracked and the tears started falling and she looked at me. Right at me. The eyes that had worked on me my whole life. I felt that old pull start up in my chest. I felt my resolve starting to bend. Right at that moment, I felt Rena watching me. Not Alara. Me. Waiting to see if I was the man I said I was. I said, Mom, Wes didn't twist your words. Because Rena told me the same thing last night before I ever talked to him. Two people who don't know what the other said told me the exact same story. You said it. Alara's tears stopped. Not slowly, like someone turned off a faucet. The wounded expression fell away, and what was underneath was flat and hard. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother without a mask on. She said, so what? Her voice was steady. So what if I said it? It's true. She married into this family. I've been here since the beginning. I carried you. I raised you alone. And she comes in and tries to keep my grandson from me? I said, nobody kept Wes from you. You had every weekend, every holiday. What we tried to keep from him was the idea that his mother was the enemy, and you couldn't let that go. She turned on Rena. You did this. You turned my son against me. Rena didn't flinch. She didn't look at me for help. She said, Alara, I have never asked him to choose between us. Not once. But you made Wes choose between me and you every single day. Every phone call, every gift, every time you told him I was nagging or not his real family, you made him pick. And you made sure he picked you. She said, my son kicked me in the face while I was on my knees picking up his dirty clothes. And the first thing out of your mouth was to ask if I had been nagging him. Alara opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I leaned forward and laid down the rules. No buying Wes anything without our approval. No more pickups without permission. No more phone calls during disciplines. No more comments to Wes about Rena. Ever. If any of them broke even once, she didn't see Wes at all. Period. She tried one more card. I worked 2 jobs so you could have clothes. I went without so you could have things. I sacrificed my whole life to raise you on my own. And this is how you repay me? By choosing her? It hit. It hit because it was true. I said, you were a good mother to me. I have never said you weren't. Then I paused. But you were a terrible grandmother to my son because you didn't help him. You armed him. Every gift was a weapon against his mother. You built this, Mom. You built exactly what you spent 9 days living with. You lasted 9 days. Rena has lasted 13 years. She's still in that house. She never once called me at 11 at night and said she couldn't do it. Alara put her hand over her mouth. She didn't argue. She didn't have a move left. Rena and I walked out. We drove home. In the car, Rena reached over and took my hand. She held it tight, not shaking, not nervous, just firm and warm and steady. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say I'm proud of you. She looked at me and she said, that's the man I married. 4 words. They hit me harder than anything my mother said in that room. We pulled into our driveway. Wes was on the couch in the living room. No tablet, no phone, no screen of any kind, just sitting there with his hands in his lap, waiting. He looked up. He looked at Rena, at the bruise still fading around her eye, and something in his expression broke open one more time. Not the big dramatic breaking from earlier, but something quieter. He said, I'm sorry, Mom. Not Rena. Mom. Rena nodded once. Wes nodded back. Nobody said anything else that night.